let me share the screen for now. But I'm a little bit sorry because my Zoom in my computer sometimes it be a little bit slow for a moment. But now I think it's
yeah.
Yeah, you can see it's not frozen, right?
No, not at the moment. No, it's all good.
Oh, okay. So in case it will be frozen, let me try this. If I do this, is that frozen?
Nothing is frozen at the moment. It all looks good.
So it goes, okay. It continues, goes right. Okay. Okay, I will start it. All right, my topic here today is the Sri Lanka and the Maritime Silk Road, especially from the 2nd century BC to the 9th century AD. So the classical period to the early medieval times, considering the Chinese sources in the Tang Dynasty especially. And I divided the topic into several chapters. The first part is a main timeline of the whole topic. And the second part is the first citation in the Chinese sources, source Han Shu, about the kingdom of Sri Lanka, which the name is different here is Sichengbu Kingdom. And the third part concerning the Pausanias, but in Pausanias, he did not mention Sri Lanka or any part of the maritime silk trade precisely, but he did mention, he did put that Ceres in a maritime consideration, which I should cite this here at the 3rd chapter. And then the 4th part is the also in the Chinese sources, especially the private writings about the Chinese Buddhist monks who mentioned that Sri Lanka in their own books. And the 5th part will be ended by the Western source Cosmas Indicopleostis in his book, who mentions very differently from other Latin and Greek sources, and we'll discuss that later. And now we go to the first part. As you can see, I made a timeline about the mentioning about Sri Lanka and the connection of the maritime trade from the 2nd century BC, then to the 8th century AD then. The first mentioning in the Chinese source Han Shu here, there's no precise time about the time when Han Shu mentioned this Sichengbu Kingdom and the maritime trade. Only thing we know is during the time of the Western Han Empire. So the terminus antiquum is the beginning of the 1st century AD, of course. And soon after that, I cited here the Periplus Marisetti as the second book and also the first Western book mentioned the silk, not the silk trade, but the long distance maritime trade about the Taprobane or Palaisimandhu, the ancient name of Sri Lanka, of course. And then it's Pausanias. And after Pausanias, I cited 2 important issues. First is the decline of the Eastern Han Empire in China, and the second is the decline of the city of Palmyra in the late 3rd century AD. These 2 things are very important because the decline of the Han dynasty means that the China failed to organize as the powerful centralism. And that made the Chinese chronicles, official chronicles, paid more attention about the inner affairs, inner political affairs, but not the outer affairs, especially the outer economic affairs. And the decline of the city Palmyra may give the Western merchants some disaster when they're trying to when they tried to make trade with the Far East by the sea, especially. As we already know, the importance of Palmyra, and it played a role around the Persian Gulf about the silk trade, especially the maritime silk trade. So after these two big issues occurred, after then, the sources about the maritime silk trade and of course the Sri Lanka became more and more vaguely, and we can only see some fragmentary information from the Chinese private books. The first is from the Fa Xian Zhuan, the biography of Fa Xian. The Fa Xian is one of the Chinese Buddhist monk who traveled in person to Sri Lanka in the beginning of the 5th century AD. So fortunately, we can see some information about Sri Lanka in his work. And then is Cosmas Indicopleustis, a century and a half after Fa Xian, mentions that Sri Lanka is the middle point of the maritime silk trade, not other places, but Sri Lanka. So he claimed the strategy, economic position of Sri Lanka. And after that, the two mentioning of Chinese Buddhist monks, the first is Xuanzang. Compared to Fa Xian, Xuanzang did not visited Sri Lanka in person, and in his books, in his book, most things concern the Buddhist affairs, not the local common lives. And the last Buddhist monk in China is Jianzhen, who attempted not to go to the India or Sri Lanka, but to Japan. But in his work, we can see when he arrived at the Chinese Guangzhou prefecture, he saw that there are indeed many foreign fleets, merchant fleets especially, load at the harbor. And some of the foreign merchants, including the Sri Lanka merchants, already settled at the Guangzhou prefecture to make a living. And we'll cite that later. So first we came to the Han Shu's chapter about Sri Lanka. In the passage of Han Shu, it mentioned the very detailed maritime trade from the Chinese southeastern shore to the final destination of the southeastern shore of India subcontinent and also Sri Lanka. And I translated this by my own in case something wrong with the foreign translations. And the important information I put in color red, and I will read it here. When Rinan has been blocked, sailing from Xuwen and Hepu to Chinese harbor in the southeast shore, for 5 months, there is the Duyuan kingdom. Again, sailing for 4 months, there is the Yilumo kingdom. Again, they're sailing for more than 20 days, there is the Shenli kingdom. Walking for about 10 days, there is the Fugandulu kingdom. From the Fugandulu kingdom, sailing for 2 months, there is the Huangzhi kingdom. And soon after, at the south of Huangzhi, there is the Sichengbu kingdom. This Sichengbu kingdom means Sri Lanka, of course. Han's translators and ambassadors returned to China from this place. And yeah, this is from this text we can see very detailed information about the voyage. Along the voyage, we can see many different places, countries that mentioned by the Chinese official document, and also the duration of time. So it can be put as consideration of the distance between the two different countries. And here I also made a map about this. But firstly, let me present not my map, but the map, the consideration from the Japanese scholar Fujita Toyohachi in the middle of the last century, which I put it all here. His consideration about the mentioned foreign kingdoms, unknown kingdoms, by the testimonies only related to the phonetical similarity, so the pronunciations, and nothing more. That also is the weakness of his assumption. So we can see in his assumption, he put many kingdoms, 3 of them, located them at the South Myanmar, and 1 Duyuan in the Sumatra, and others, well, remained the same as I assumed. So I present here also the problems of his consideration. Firstly, for the first kingdom, Du Yuan, it cannot be what he considered as Du Kun or Du Jun kingdom. His consideration mainly came from the Chinese book Tongdian. And in Tongdian, especially to say this Du Kun or Du Jun kingdom has only been heard in the Sui dynasty. So in a very late time than the Han Empire. So in my opinion, this Du Yuan is another kingdom, named the Du Bo kingdom. It appeared in a earlier Chinese source named the Liang Shu, the book of the Liang dynasty. And this kingdom should be located in Philippines. There are 2 reasons. The first, of course, the phonetical similarity. They all started with the Du, but more importantly, it's the second. So the archaeological evidence. Some unearthed the South China Sea potteries in the Central Philippines enlightens its strong commercial connection with the Han China, especially not the Han China and also the pre-Han China. We can see these, because the time limitation, I cannot present more detailed in this time. But if anyone interested about this, one can read the paper from the Berenice Bellina, a French scholar. Her paper is very profound about this question. And the second is the Yilu Mo kingdom, which in Fujita's consideration, he refers to Yilu Mo as another kingdom named Julomi, because of the phonetical similarity. And for me, it's probably right. But his problem is he located the wrong position of this Julomi kingdom. He put the location of Julomi in Myanmar. But it actually, in the Chinese source, Xin Tang Shu, the new book of the Tang Dynasty, the chronicle, it mentions that the Julomi kingdom locates in the southeast of a place named the Pan. And the Pan is near the coast of southern Thailand. So if Julomi is located in the southeast of the southern Thailand, it cannot be in Myanmar because latitude, the Myanmar is very similar to the southern Thailand. So it cannot be that place. In my suggestion, the only possible place for this Julomi or Yilu Mo kingdom is in the South Malay Peninsula, probably in the southernmost point of the peninsula. And then for the other 2 kingdoms, the Shenli kingdom and the Fugandulu kingdom, Fujita's demonstrations are also unconvincing in my aspect. What makes Shenli as Xili in Fujita's consideration only relied on nothing but their phonetical similarity, as usual. But the most important clue given by the same passage in Hanshu says that both of the 3 kingdoms, the former, the Yilu Mo kingdoms, and these 2 kingdoms, Shenli and Fugandulu, those 3 kingdoms are very near to each other. So the adjacency of the 3 kingdoms. And since we already clarified that this Yilu Mo is in the southern Malay Peninsula, so the other 2 kingdoms, Shenli and the Fugandulu, must be nearby. Because the distance between the Yilu Mo and Shenli is only about 20 days for sailing, considering the other distance about the more than 4 months or 5 months of sailing, the 20 days of sailing is quite short. As for Fugandulu kingdom, Hanshu says that the travelers only need about 10 days walking to reach Fugandulu from Shenli. So the distance between the Shenli and the Fugandulu is not a maritime road, but a land road, and a very short land road, only about 10 days of walking. In that case, in my opinion, the way between this Shenli and the Fugandulu is a transpeninsular road. And considering the distance, the transpeninsular road or the Kra Isthmus is the most probable. And also many archaeological evidences also show a strong economic engagement between this isthmus, especially the city of Kosamkel and the city of Cochrane and the pre-Han and Han China. We can also see this strong archaeological evidence from Bellina's paper, and I'll put it in the parenthesis here. So to sum up, the left is the assumption of Fujita. We already said that, and the right one is my opinion, which we can see the Shenli and the Fugandulu is no more in the southern Myanmar, but in the Kra Isthmus, and that will be most probable. And then we go to the next part about Pausanias. Pausanias is later than the Hanshu, but in Pausanias, he has something very different from the other Latin and Greek authors. Someone even after him did not notice that Cyrus has some maritime link with the West, but Pausanias indeed noticed that. First, we saw the Pausanias original text in my translation in English, of course. I read the right here. So the first is the thread from which the series make the dresses are produced from no bark, but in a different way as follows. There is in the land of the series an insect which the Greeks called sed, though the series themselves give it another name. So in this part, he noticed that the silk does not come from the trees or any plants, but a worm, but the insect. So this is very different from any other Latin and Greek sources, writers. And then he made up a name about the city of Ceres and country of Ceres anyway. The Seria is known to be an island lying in a recess of the Red Sea, but I have heard that it's not the Red Sea, but a river called Ser. And then these Ceres themselves are of the Ethiopian race, as are the inhabitants of the neighboring islands, Abbas and Sachea. Some say, however, that they are not Ethiopians, but a Mongol race of Scythians and Indians. In this case, we need to notice that he said that the Mongol race of Scythians and Indians, that puts the Ceres as a part, maybe belongs to a part of the Indo-Scythians, which may locate the Ceres to the Indus Valley. And that should come from the cognition of the Periplus, because Periplus mentioned that at the mouth of the Indus Valley, there's the city in Barbarike exported the silk cargo to the West. So maybe Pausanias noticed that and he made this assumption. And we can see this some comparison between Pausanias and other Western classical authors. We can see from the Pliny, he cited that the silk, lanicu silvarum nobilis, so silvarum in the forest. And also from the Solinus, he says also vellera arborum, so arborum, also from the trees. And even some later citation from especially the last one, Ammianus Marcellinus, he cited more precisely the wood, so arborum, especially. So it's very different. They all consider that the silk come from the trees or plants, but Pausanias, he truly knows that the technique, or at least some technique about the silk itself. and he does not remind the later Latin author, obviously, and that should be an unfortunate thing. And goes on, we can see this Pausanias put the Ceres in the maritime horizon, which according to Ptolemy mentions two different names. The first is the Serikes is location for the people of Ceres. And he put the Ceres as the land Silk Road people. And then later he cited another name of the Sinai. This Sinai is different in Ptolemy's imagination and put this only the Sinai to the maritime consideration. But Pausanias did not mention neither Sinai or at the purpose indicated Thenai, only Ceres. And that will be a very huge improvement in the Western aspect. After then, the maritime silk trade existed, but only a few documents mentioned the maritime trade and also the Sri Lanka's position. We can search nothing after, especially after the Ptolemy and before the Ammianus Marcellinus. The only reliable and most reliable source is in the eastern aspect, especially this work of Fa Xian, the biography of Fa Xian. Since he visited Sri Lanka in person, so his words is very important also for the Chinese chronicles. For example, the later Chinese official documents repeat the information given by Fa Xian, especially Liang Shu and the Tongdian, which completed in the Tang Dynasty. They repeated mostly the same words of Fa Xian. And what Fa Xian mentioned about Sri Lanka in his word, occasionally, in very small passages of his work, he says that two elements concerning the China. The first is a light green jade statue in Sri Lanka's temple. And we all know that this jade statue is definitely not a Western or some kind of Indian exported cargo. It's definitely from the China or the Western regions, so very close to China. And the jade statue is very big, more than 5 meters high. That means the real material of this jade statue is rather bigger than the occurrence here. So such big statue, of course, required a very big merchant fleet to do the transportation, right? And also the next thing very important is here. Suddenly he saw a merchant put a white silk folding fan of Jin dynasty in front of this jade statue. He felt great and in tears. He felt sorrow because he gets homesick. He won't go home, and the merchant, ethnically unknown, could be Chinese, could be other merchants of the Indian merchant, etc., and also some Middle Asian origin. But the silk folding fan is definitely from China. He cited this as the Jin dynasty. So it's definitely from China. In this case, we could make the assumption that in Fa Xian's time, the silk trade, not only the silk trade, many cargoes in China have been transported to Sri Lanka frequently and even in a large scale, not in some small scale because of the decline of the Han Dynasty. No, it's in a very large scale and only in the private nature, not the tributary trade of the Chinese government or some official activities. And we can see this later also because Fa write down a very detailed information about his return journey, the return journey from the sea. And it can be divided into 3 parts. And every step of Fa Xian's return journey, he was taken by a giant merchant ship. Of course, different giant merchant ships, but he indicated they are giant and also merchant ship. That makes us clear about the existence of the maritime trade between Sri Lanka and China, even there are no any official documents write down the source, only in Fa Xian. And here I also made the map of Fa Xian's return journey from the mouth of the Ganges, and then to Sri Lanka, and then to this place is perhaps Sumatra or Java. It cannot be determined. But then he back to Chinese Laoshan prefecture. There's one thing we need to alert is that the merchants back from the Sumatra and Java to China, they firstly tried to land it here around this place. So the Chinese Guangzhou prefecture, but the storm forced them went northward to that another place. So generally speaking, since the Hanshu means that this part of China, the Guangzhou prefecture of China, already was a big harbor for the international maritime trade. And in Fa Xian's period, it continued working as the emporia for the international maritime trade. And then we should leave the Cosmas Indico-Pleiostis later, after we discussed all the Chinese Buddhist monks. The next one, but we should memorize that Cosmas time is before the last 2 Chinese monks, the Xuanzang and Jianzhen. But allow me to first introduce these 2 monks. First, the Xuanzang. Firstly, both Xuanzang and Jianzhen were from the Tang Dynasty, and there's nothing to surprise us of the text of Xuanzang, since indeed Xuanzang went to India in person, but he did not visit Sri Lanka. He only heard the information about Sri Lanka from the Indian locals. This is the first thing. And he gave another name to Sri Lanka. The name is Semcheluo Kingdom. And this Semcheluo is a very typical Buddhist word. It's so, and also the description about Sri Lanka in his aspect concerned mostly the Buddhist affairs, not the common lives. But the next monk, Jianzhen, while he stayed at Chinese Guangzhou prefecture, he saw in person, in witness eyes, about very many foreign merchant ships moored at Guangzhou. I will read this from the top. There are ships from Poloman, so India, Bos, Persia, and Kunlun, countries of Southeastern Asia, floating on the river. Their numbers are uncountable. The ships load perfumes, medicines, and treasures, accumulating like mountains. The ships are about 6 and 7 zhang, so it's about 18 to 21 meters deep. People from the Shizi kingdom, which the Sri Lanka, the kingdom of lion, directly translation that, and Dashi kingdom, Arabia, Gutang kingdom, and other small kingdoms cannot be identified clearly, come to settle at Guangzhou. So they are not only to make trade at Guangzhou, but also to make a living there, to settle there. And the ethnic composition at Guangzhou is complex. So that is to say, in the Tang Dynasty, so at least from the 7th century AD to the 9th century AD, the maritime silk trade between China and Sri Lanka is enormous. And we can also see from the Western side that Cosmas-Nico-Pleistos, after almost many centuries of the periplus, Cosmas noticed the maritime silk trade again, and the second time we can say that. And in this occasion, he did not follow the tradition of the Westerners to use the Thinai or the Ceres to indicate the Chinese people, but he used a very different word, Zinista, to indicate the kingdom of China. And also, his words to indicate silk is rather difficult. It is rather different. The metaxene, which I will discuss this later. And he claims that the Sri Lanka, not other place of India, is in the middle position between the Dinista and also the Western world. And from the remotest countries, so he means the Dinista, China, and other trading places, it receives silk yarn that he says about Taprobane. So Sri Lanka receives silk yarn, aloes, cloves, sandalwood, and other products. And these again are passed on to mods on this side and then to the other side. So there are three notes we need to pay attention on the Cosmas-Nico-Pleistos. The first is the term of silk. It's no more sericum, but metaxa. And the second, the name for China is also changed to the Zinista. And the third is both the land road and the sea road are referred to Zinista, because here he says that he then who comes by land from Zinista to Persia shortens very considerably the length of the journey. So in Cosmas' idea, he combined both the Western imagination about the Ceres and the Thinai to the same country named Zinista. And we should discuss this one by one. First is the title of Metaxa. It's very interesting because we just discussed an hour later before about there's something happened at the reign of the 5 good empires in the Roman aspect. So the silk trade became more and more explode. We can see that it explode in a certain case. And what we can see here can also prove this assumption. Firstly, this metaxa appeared in early period, for example, in Lucilius and Vitruvius. It does not indicate silk, of course, especially the first one when Lucilius indicates the linique mataxam, the linique, the linen, so mataxa must indicate an object. This object is probably a rope. The linen rope is the most probable translation in Lucilius. So we know that mataxa can be indicated to a line, to a yarn, to thread, to rope, something like that, but not textile, to pay attention on that. And then we have the Vitruvius, while in his work, he indicates the metaxetomice. In this time, tomice indicate, of course, the cord, and metaxe should be a material. And since the Vitruvius indicate this metaxetomice as material for the architecture, it cannot be a very luxurious material to do the heavy work of the knocks here of the architecture works. So it should be a cheap material definitely not silk. And considering the period of Vitruvius, it should not be the silk too, because at the time of Vitruvius, the silk just appeared in Rome in its first time, first time. So metaxa here, I rather to translate it as a linen or cotton or something like that, but definitely not silk. But soon after, in the vertical of the reign of the Marcus Aurelius and Commodus, and the metaxa definitely became a word for silk. And in my aspect, not silk textile, not silk flows, but silk yarn, considering the first in Lucilius, it's a rope. So it can be, it should be a line or a yarn, a thread, something like that. It cannot be a textile, a different form, right? So we can see that already in the Marcus Aurelius and Commodus, the metaxa has been used by the Romans as silk. But there's not a lot appearance of this metaxa until the time of the Cosmas-Indico-Pleistos. And along with this metaxa, the zenista, the mentioning of zenista also appeared firstly in the Westerners, in the Western aspect, in the Cosmas Indico-Pleistos, the first time. But actually, we can trace the zenista to a earlier time. In my opinion, this zenista is clearly connected to the Sanskrit word China Stana. It can be put in two parts. First, it is China, and then it's Stana or Stan, as the land of it. It appeared both in the Sanskrit tradition and the Middle Asia tradition. And the appearance of the Chinastan, Sogdian form of this Chinastan, on the 4th century later unearthed by Stein, and it write down clearly about this Chinastan. Someone may argue that this Chinastan may indicate only a part of China, not the whole China, but it has a very close connection with China. No one can deny that. Well, since the time limitation, I will someone if want to know this can be seen from my paper later. And the second appearance of this is the Sogdian Buddhist inscription in the late 6th century AD. But this time it's only have a chance to indicate this genus stamp, because some scholars have other translation about this sentence. So it could be China or other word. It's arguable. But the last one in Tang Dynasty, the bilingual Sino-Syriac Nestorian stele, very famous, and now it's very well known also in China. And if I'm not wrong, it's still in Chinese Xi'an, the Museum of Steel, which I visited some years before. It's very remarkable inscription, and it's truly mentioned the Sinistan, but not in the Chinese, but in the Syrian. So the conclusion of this is that the root Zini or Zina is undoubtedly comes from the Sanskrit word China, already attested in the Arthashastra with a compound China Padana, Chinese silk, Chinese cloth. Yeah, and then the ramifications of the old Indian term China are also the Greek forms Athenais, or the Sinai in my consideration. As for the later part, so the Stan, its Sanskrit form Stana also means the place, so it can derived from the Indian word or Indian culture. So Well, to sum up, there's let us look this timeline. So that we know the first mentioning about the Sri Lanka in the maritime trade is in the Chinese source Han Shu, and then the Periplus in the Western source. And then Pausanias did not indicate Sri Lanka, but it truly indicates the series as a very strong connection to the maritime trade, which may reflect that Sri Lanka is also a part of this maritime silk trade, since Periplus already indicated sometimes before. And after the decline of the Chinese Eastern Han Dynasty and Western Palmyra, someone may think that the silk trade, the amount of silk trade declined in a certain case, but actually it does not decline in any case, in any direction, which we can see from the Chinese private work, especially from the biography of Fa Xian and some later source of the Eastern the Hellenic works of the Cosmas Indigo Pleiades, and the silk trade and the other Eastern trade on the sea continuing existed in the later period, and also in my aspect to say is not continue but prosperous in the Tang Dynasty, so the early medieval time. And this is all my presentation shows, and thank you. Yeah.
Oh, frozen.
Yeah, no, I stopped sharing because I finished this. So
Hey, thank you very much.
Yeah,
That was a very in-depth introduction to the maritime trade, silk trade route. So thank you very much for that one. Are there any questions? We have a time for at least a few questions. We have many actually. Patrick, would you like to begin?
Yeah. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, because I actually feel really excited for listening that all through, because I think it is super important, and I may have some rather like a comments than questions. That like my research is mainly on like ancient and medieval music systems, and there are some examples that may be kind of echoing your ideas. So I'm thinking that I would just share it a little bit. So I'm typing in chat box, but I will try to quickly explain that. For example, when you mentioned about Sri Lanka, and you may have heard that there is a bow instrument called Ravanahatha. So it is, and traditionally we think that the Chinese erhu is from the Middle Eastern rebab, but this Ravanahatha comes to be a new kind of hypothesis that this may be kind of transmitted to China through the marine way, because this seems to be a kind of isolated example that looks historically irrelevant to other like Middle Eastern rebab or the Byzantine lira. And another one is the Rin-Yugaku, so the music from the Champa. So it sets from the Japanese tradition, it said that this is a monk from Champa who bring those music to Japan. And traditionally, for example, the Ran Liu O, we think it is the Chinese Lan Ling Wang, so it's from China. But there are some Sanskrit scholars that talks about this may be a kind of Japanese misuse from the something called Bring Back the Sun from the Meridian, which is an Indian myth and an Indian song. So this also comes to be a new hypothesis that maybe I remember that your trade road that, you know, Indian and Southern Indians, Sri Lanka, and comes to the southern part of Vietnam, which sounds to be mapping with this example. And the third one is what they call the Kudumiyama line inscription that talks about the 7 musical modes from the state of Tamil Nadu, and which, interestingly, that from the Sui Shu, the Chinese recorded in length about the Su Qi Po, someone said from Kucha that bring in this modal system. But like this one has to be become very popularized in the Tang music because it comes to be a kind of 28 modes just based on this thinking. But the southern Indian kind of example I would say it may also suggest a kind of link on the maritime. So I really believe that if your research still go on and you will have great help in remapping this kind of development of music history.
Yeah. I think it's very important for us to notice that because every connection between the Indian Ocean and the China South Sea is very countable, especially for the early period. And I may ask the instrument similar to erhu in the Sri Lanka, what period is that appeared firstly in Sri Lanka and then in China? May you explain?
Yeah, sure. So erhu, the earliest what they call huqin, like erhu is a variant of Chinese huqin, which is I think in Song Dynasty, early Song Dynasty. And the Sri Lankan one, I have difficulties on kind of collecting their information because there are many in Singarit. I guess you may have access to it, but it is certainly like within your period. So it will be earlier than Song Dynasty. So I'm not sure which part of like early medieval period it belongs to.
But in India, it does not have the same similar instrument or something like that before.
There is a hypothesis that seems like the Sri Lankan one may be the earliest, and then it also kind of simultaneously transmitted to China and also the southern part of India. So if this is correct, then the Indian one is later.
Okay. Thank you for this information. And I should move to search this later.
Yeah, thank you so much. And please do let me know if you have any findings.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, then we had Ronald as well.
Hi, Zhaoyu. Thank you for your excellent presentations on the Sri Lanka. So I'm not quite familiar with this area, so everything is new to me. So maybe I cannot ask a deep insight question. But I do have one question. So I mean, is there the local historical materials for the Sri Lanka? Because from the source you provided mainly and from the Chinese, and the second is Greek and Latin literature. But I think maybe the first hand and the most important resource should be the Southeast Asian historical materials, but I didn't see it. So why?
Well, in this aspect, especially for me, it's hard to search very detailed in the, especially the Indian documents. I will focus on this in later time. But actually, when we noticed about the international connection, because it's not concerning one region or two regions, but a trans-culture, multi-culture interactions. So that means the Eastern reactions and the Mediterranean Sea reactions should be very important. If they did not write this down, perhaps that the trade in the Indian Ocean or in the Indian subcontinent or Sri Lanka has been regional. So it's not a truly international trade. It's only in limited regions, right? Well, I honestly to say, I cannot read the Sanskrit, but it will be very important in the future. If I continue this work in the next time, I of course will focus to search more about the Sanskrit and perhaps also other, if there are new archaeological testimonies can be found from the locals, that will be very happy for me to change my view even and to correct all my opinions, because the history, is the well already. Every time it goes old, it can be corrected by the later, right? So I'm very happy to do that. But for now, the only sources that we can have are those. So for a certain case, it's to be honest, for me, it's already very hard to present the Chinese mountainous Silk Road to the Western scholars. But I will continue to do that until there are some echoes also in the West can well put this in a serious consideration. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
And then we had one final question, I think, from Sergio.
Hi. Yeah, I have three questions actually. I will try to merge them and I will pretend it's one, so nobody will notice. Now, the first question is, you mentioned the creation by Pausanias of a term a posteriori, and the positioning by him of China, or in any case, Sinai, in a maritime horizon. I'd like to know if you have any explanation of the psychodynamic of the creation of such a geographical entity by an author out of nowhere. I'm saying, is he inventing? And if yes, why? I'm interested in the. I'm positively interested in the answer, because from a methodological point of view, if you surmise that an author invents one detail, you must be ready to admit the same for a lot of authors. And this there comes the second question about Cosmas Indicopleustes. I suggest we contextualize the authors of our sources. Cosmas is a very, 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 very bad intellectual. Albert Serstevens dismissed him, utterly dismissed him as a possible source of anything about the Silk Road. He unfortunately wrote his book in his monastic retirement, but he's not better. He's not better. He's not a good author. So when we handle literary material, we should, first of all, verify the quality, just like Agathias as a historian. It's crap literature, really. Two etymological observations. Sinistan from Chinastana. I have a problem with the accent. Greek wouldn't have any problem in mimicking the Sanskrit stress, Chinastana, Sinista. And I would suggest an Iranic mediation, even because India was under Persian control in the 3rd, 4th century, and other inscriptions you've referred to are from Iranic languages. So we should, actually, the inscriptions you've mentioned do attest Chinistan in Iranic languages, and Astana and Istan is the same suffix in Sanskrit or in Iranic dialects. So Chinastana might well be a calque from an Iranic language. We shouldn't always think that Sanskrit is the most original
yeah, of course.
language. About mataxa, I suggest it means raw material, raw textile. It meant, and it's probably a Latinism.
So a
Mataxa,
textile.
raw textile. So it has to do with the way silk was imported.
Because I always treat carefully about the different forms. So if we mention the textile, it cannot indicate both other forms such as flows or yarn. I distinguish the three materials carefully because that the periplus indicate the silk is can be transported and also already transported by these three forms.
Wait a sec. I'm sorry. I have an idea, Zhaoyu. I'm gonna show you what a mataxa is still today. Wait a sec. Because it's not Greek, it's Latin. It was metaxa, and the Greeks transliterated the Latin.
Yeah.
Metaxa, and then
Yeah, to
copying
the grave,
the
then to the grave.
preverb meta, they retransliterated into metaxa, adjusting the accent because of the
Yeah.
quantity of the alphabet. It's a bundle, and it's still attested in Italian. Matassa.
So it could
Matassa.
be, as for me, it's definitely not a textile form, because textile
I'm
form.
sorry, a cloth. I call it a textile. It's not a woven material.
Yeah, yeah.
Just like textile. This
that,
textile to me.
In
This
the
is textile to me.
I know this, but the form in my definition, it should be the floss, rather floss, or a band of yarn or floss. The
For example,
textile, yeah, that orthonion, that means the clothing, the textile, that means that, and this is still the raw material. So the raw material is floss, rather floss, or a band of yarn. Yeah, this we have this.
Yeah, what I'm saying, it doesn't milk silk. It can be whatever textile. It's just
yeah,
a bundle of textile. You should specify a metaxa what. That's the point.
Yeah, I say this especially when I cited the Solinus and the later Vitruvius, right? I think this notion can be ampled in the later time when the silk yarn went frequently to the West, and they did not surprised by the material in the 4th, 5th century AD. So they Romanized this material as it can be gained commonly. So they use this metaxa both to indicate the Chinese silk yarn or silk flows, but definitely not the textile form that, in this case. And well, in this place, I stand with you, and this explanation may be more clear in this time now. And the previous problems you ask, what about that? I a little bit forgot. Can you repeat the first?
Yes, Pausanias, how do you explain the psychodynamic of the retro invention, so to speak, of a geographical entity?
Okay, the Pausanias is a very arguable author, especially, and very special author. But for me, I think while he connect the series to a mongrel race of the Ethiopian race, the Scythian and Indian race, or he said that they may be a part of the Ethiopian race, in my opinion, to say, he only relied on the experience of the periplus, because the Western scholars very obsessed to link the series to the Transgangetic region, as I used to say. So the Transgangetic region is not only a point, it's a line. It can be expanded to the south of the Bactria, which the road described by the periplus. So that maritime connection in Pausanias, in my suggestion to say, is that road, not the maritime Silk Road that started from the Chinese southeast shore. That should be another part, and the Pausanias cannot know that, since he never arrived to any southern part of the Indian subcontinent, right? So this is my explanation for that.
Okay, thank you very much. That was really interesting. Interesting discussion as well.
I was muted. Sorry, I said thank you. It was here.
Yeah.